so much. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you to BirdLife Jamaica, especially Damani for inviting me to talk about some of the great work that myself and colleagues have been doing in Jamaica. And yes, thank you for saying that, because 100% that trip that you took to come visit me at Fountain Hill Nature Preserve in 2019 was awesome. It was such a blast, and I think that this is something that we should start as a tradition once normal field seasons get back up and running, hopefully soon. Um, it was great. For those of you that couldn't join, a few of them came, and we went over how I ban birds and process these birds, and we went over a bunch of different types of new technologies that we're using to track bird migration and bird movement. So it was all around a great time. And that middle photo here, I had to take them to our resident roosting potu, which I gotta say is one of my favorite things about Fountain Hill, is the little scavenger hunt for finding out all the new potu roosts from year to year. So it was just an all around great experience having you at Fountain Hill. And so the title of my talk is The Importance of Jamaica for Migratory Birds. So I wanted to kind of talk about what I mean about this. And you're gonna see this little image here a lot throughout my presentation, because this is kind of something that I really focus a lot of my work on. So if you look over to the left of your screen, this is something called the full annual cycle. And this is a concept that we're really focused on when we're talking about migratory birds and doing migratory bird research, because the whole concept is that one period of a bird's annual cycle, say the breeding period, certain events that happen during that period may go on to influence birds' condition, success, survival, and so on during subsequent periods of that annual cycle. So everything is kind of all interacting within a bird's full annual cycle to really go into overall condition and reproductive success back when you get back to the breeding season the next year. So when we're talking about Jamaica, and if you look, you can see here that during the non-breeding period, birds are really spending most of their year on the non-breeding grounds. So all the migratory birds that you see in Jamaica, they are spending most of their lives in Jamaica. So really that's their home. And I do want to kind of mention this great webinar that Pete Mara, who is really leading the charge with all this full annual cycle work in Jamaica, gave a great webinar with Birds Caribbean about all the American Redstart research that's been done over the past 30 years. And so Jamaica is a system that has really taught us a lot about winter ecology of migratory birds as a whole. So I think that's also really great. And so, yeah, just think about that when you're birding. The next time you go out and you see all these migrants coming in, I think Pete might have had this joke as well, that maybe we should change the name of American Redstart to Jamaican Redstart. Who knows? I don't know. That's just an idea, because they're really your birds. They spend the majority of their lives there in Jamaica. So I think it's a really great thing. So I do want to talk a little bit about the history of myself and my research in Jamaica. So I started working down there in 2015 with the Smithsonian, and I was helping researchers study ovenbirds, and more specifically their territoriality and some of their migratory movements. And then that led me to start my Master's of Science degree at Ohio State University, where in 2016 and 2017 winters, I studied the winter ecology of Swainson's warblers, and more specifically how they respond to difference in precipitation patterns. And then after I defended my thesis and I was done with the Swainson's warbler work, Jamaica had already pulled me in. I wanted to come back. So for the next 2 years, I actually was the field crew leader for the long-term research on American Redstarts, where we looked at territoriality, and we implemented a lot of these new cool technologies to look at migratory connectivity and migratory behaviors, such as this geolocator that you see me holding. And this work was done with all of my great collaborators, like the PhD student who's working on American Redstarts, Bryant Dossman, down here, and our collaborators, Pete Mara and Colin Studs. So can't do all that work without them. And then finally, in the end of 2019, I started my PhD at Cornell University, where I'm going to be studying black-throated blue warblers full annual cycle, both on the breeding season at Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire, and also I'll be doing some winter ecology work as well in Jamaica. Just get a little drink. This is definitely the longest I've talked to anybody since COVID-19 started, so bear with me. Okay, so for my talk today, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of information about kind of each of these components that I've already talked about. I'll be talking about what I learned about Swainson's warbler's winter ecology and the response to rainfall variations throughout 2016 and 2017 field seasons. I'll be introducing the Black-throated Blue Warbler project, and talk about how I'll learn more about full annual cycle and the impact of climate change. And then I'll wrap it up by talking about some exciting new directions for fields research in Jamaica, and more importantly, how some of you could potentially help me get some data and be more directly involved with studying migratory birds on the ground in Jamaica all year round. So for my research, I really just focus on climate change and migratory birds as broad as it gets. That's really what I'm interested in. I want to know how migratory birds are influenced by environmental change and the different types of behaviors that they may have to help respond to certain aspects of environmental change. And so we know that climate change has been influencing migratory birds in a variety of ways. I could talk all night about this, but something to take away is that we've been seeing population level changes in certain aspects of migratory bird populations, like range shifts and phenological change, that are really important to understand more about when we're trying to figure out why some populations of migratory birds are in decline. And when I think about this, I really think about how migratory birds are world travelers, and you can see by this image here, migratory birds span the entire globe. And so when you want to understand how climate change is influencing a certain species of migratory birds, you have to just kind of remember that they're being influenced and they're experiencing vastly different environmental conditions during their breeding period and during their wintering period, and anywhere that they're stopping over in between. So we have to focus on this full annual cycle. Once again, I'm going to keep bringing this up once again to really get a good indication of what's really causing population decline or influences of climate change, and where that could be coming from, because it's different no matter where a bird, and it's different within species as well. So specifically within the Caribbean, we know that there's a few things happening. It's been seen over the past few decades that there's this overall drying trend within the Caribbean. And it's also been shown that extreme weather events will be happening more frequently. So you'll see longer spouts of droughts or really intense rainfall events. And so all of these things really go into my thinking about formulating this project for Swainson's warblers. So I really wanted to understand how environmental change is influencing overwintering migratory birds and if they can respond to these changes. And Swainson's warblers are kind of this interesting species to study this with, because not a lot is known about them. They are super tricky to study. They're super drab, and they hang out in the dense understory. And I'm sure that as birders in Jamaica, it's probably, you notice that it's tricky to find. I think that most of the time you need playback to find these birds. They're not easy to behaviorally observe at all. So thankfully for my project, I got to use radio transmitter technology that I put on these birds' backs. So I didn't have to see them, but I could still follow them with hand tracking methods and hand tracking receivers. So thank you to technology for allowing me to figure out more about these birds' winter ecology. And they're also, they have low population numbers. And that's also something that's tricky to look at too, since they are so hard to find. So it's, we're pretty sure that they're stable population numbers, but that's kind of up in the air as well. They also occupy these really vulnerable habitats like tropical dry forests that are in decline on the wintering grounds, as well as bottomland hardwood forests and a different array of declining forests on the breeding grounds. So overall, it's a very important species to understand in terms of the effects of climate change. So going back to what we kind of know about what's happening in the Caribbean in terms of environmental change and the fact that within these years, this graph is a little outdated, but we're seeing a continuation of this trend. And this shows that there's an overall increase in the variability of rainfall every year, as well as an overall decline in total rainfall. So overall, rainfall is becoming much more unpredictable in Jamaica as time goes on, and it's overall becoming drier. So there's kind of two things at play here. So these types of things, kind of really make me ask, how will these types of rainfall patterns within season and even between seasons impact overwintering migratory birds? And most importantly, how can they potentially respond to these changes? So we know that for non-breeding insectivorous migrants, rainfall is incredibly important because rainfall really is what's driving food abundances for overwintering migratory warblers. And so that this relationship really holds true for Swainson's warblers as well. They're a ground foraging bird, so they forage a little differently than the American redstart, which is an aerial forager. But more rainfall overall equals more food. So as time goes on and it becomes drier, that just means there's going to be overall less food for migratory birds.
I'm listening to a webinar on BirdLife. But I've lost the video.
Everyone, please put your mics on mute.
Thank you. Okay. So that's something that we wanted to confirm about Swainson's warblers is that their interaction of food and rainfall. So we determined that there was overall more food when there was more rainfall. And then something else that I wanted to understand was this interaction with habitat. So how is habitat changing as rainfall is changing? So we know that food is increasing when rainfall increases, but is that, what does that mean for vegetation structure or anything that we look at in terms of habitat quality for overwintering birds? And so I determined that dry scrub habitat is overall higher quality for overwintering Swainson's warblers. And this is in contrast to what we see for American redstarts. So American redstarts have, they're aerial insectivores, so mangroves are of highest quality for them throughout the entire wintering period. It just maintains a higher amount of food than dry scrub. And that's because when it's really dry, all the trees in dry scrub just drop their leaves. And so you can see how that would benefit a Swainson's warbler, right? More leaf litter probably means more food for them. So understanding these interactions between different types of migratory birds with different foraging guilds like American redstarts and Swainson's warblers, and how they may have completely different habitats that they prefer when trying to understand environmental change impacting these birds. And so overall, what I learned is that birds really do respond to changes in precipitation, and they do this by augmenting their space use. So when there's a drought, birds are expanding their home ranges because there's overall less food. They have to go farther to search for food, to access overall the same amount of food that they could have in a very small home range when things are wet. And so something interesting about this is that this is happening at multiple scales throughout the season. So say there's a really big rainfall event in March, and what I would see was that a week or 2 weeks later, these birds are responding to these rainfall events by tracking these food resources really tightly throughout the season. So if there's a spike in food because there's a spike in rainfall, the birds will have really small home ranges to reflect that. And also something else that I saw that was quite interesting was that when conditions were really dry, birds were using marginal habitat like mangrove forests that they wouldn't normally use when it was a normally wet year. So birds are kind of moving into these areas to compensate for lower food overall, and they're kind of using these habitats that they wouldn't normally use just because things are really dry, and they're just kind of making it, the best of a bad situation. And then we see within a week of these rainfall events, birds are out of the mangroves and back into the higher quality dry scrub. So we can take a lot of things from this. We know that birds like Swainson's warblers are responding pretty actively to fluctuating rainfall during the non-breeding season. So we also know that these dry conditions are affecting habitat use, and that birds are moving into these marginal habitats that they don't typically use, like mangroves, during periods of drought to compensate for less food. And studying individual flexibility like this to environmental change within a species is super important on a species level, because we know that these types of behaviors, this behavioral plasticity, could lead to overall adaptation of a species to climate change. So if a bird is really flexible, this could be a good sign for birds responding to climate change if it becomes progressively drier. And I think that something that's also really cool about this is that I see some surprising behaviors in this, and that birds will use pretty crappy habitats with very little food when things are not so great during adverse conditions. So this kind of really like puts more evidence into the fact that a lot of different habitat types are really important in Jamaica for protecting these migratory birds. And it might be surprising to see that there may be different birds that don't normally use these kind of brings light to the fact that even these vulnerable habitats like mangroves are critically important for different types of migratory birds that we don't see now. And all of this stuff kind of brings me to my PhD work on black-throated blue warblers. And so for black-throated blue warblers, I will be integrating a lot of what I learned with Swainson's warblers, but expanding these concepts into really looking at a full annual cycle framework for black-throated blues. So with Swainson's, I really focused on the non-breeding grounds, and I didn't learn much about breeding or fall migration, or even a little bit about spring migration, but not too much. So black-throated blue warblers, I'm really going to be focusing a lot of time on both the breeding grounds in New Hampshire and the wintering grounds in Jamaica. And so for this project, one of the biggest things that we're thinking about is the fact that in northern temperate forests where black-throated blue warblers breed, we're seeing an elongation in the green period. So there's earlier springs and later falls. And so what that means for black-throated blue warblers is that their breeding season may become extended. And so what we know about this full annual cycle is that certain events that are different or that are potentially adverse in one period may influence the next. So when thinking about how an elongation of a breeding season may influence the subsequent periods of a bird's annual cycle, we could think that, well, if a bird is breeding later into the season and is feeding young a lot later than they usually would, this might influence departure timing for fall migration, and they may have to migrate faster, or they may be behind on migration. And that means they may arrive to Jamaica or anywhere else in the Caribbean that they're wintering a little late. And so if they arrive late, maybe they're occupying a lower quality habitat type, because we know that that when birds get to the overwintering grounds, they really want to occupy high quality habitat, because high quality habitat means more food for them. So you can kind of see how these different things that are happening in the breeding season may go on to influence birds that are overwintering in Jamaica. And so this is what I want to try to understand. And to do this, I'm going to be relying on this radio telemetry technology to track these birds' movements from their breeding grounds and down through fall migration. And so I'll be using these nanotag radio transmitters that, and I won't be doing traditional hand tracking methods like I know some of you on this call have done, where you have to take around, your hand tracking antennas with a big receiver. I'm really going to be relying on this automated
Hi, Keisha, are you there?
One second. Everyone, apologies. Alicia is having some difficulties with her internet. She is trying to log back in.
Keisha, talk about the BirdLife trip for your time being here.
Okay, while we wait on Alicia to reconnect, we'll just do some housekeeping. So we have the trip on Saturday to Mona Dam. Persons who registered would have received an email back if you made it within the 15. Thanks for the overwhelming participation. We've already asked Water Commission if they will allow us again to visit early next year. So we will meet at the dam at 6:30, and then we bird and we be off property by 8:30. The following weekend, which is Sunday the 20th, we again have another outing at Ivers Jacks Hill. Those persons who registered for that as well would have received an email with their directions. And there's a note there in the event that you're having challenges understanding directions or finding the location, who to call, but we should be good. Also to note is that our next webinar is tentatively slated for January 14th. So in the interim, you can all save that date in your calendar. It's a Thursday as well, and the time will be 7 p.m. That seems to be a good time for most persons. So we're sticking with it as a standard. Also coming up in January and February, we have World Wetlands Day and the World Bird Census. We will be participating in an active way. We're waiting on information from NEPA and the Ramsar committee in terms of the details. But speaking out of turn, I know for World Wetlands Day, we will be doing the same route that we did last year, where we started at Port Royal and we did a stint at Palisados and finished up at the waterfront downtown. So persons can also book that in their calendar for the end of January going into February. Alicia is now back, so I'm going to hand over to her.
Okay, can you hear me and see me? Okay, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. Okay, it's like the one time our internet goes out is, of course, it's during this. Okay, so where was I? Automated radio telemetry to track black-throated blue warblers during their fall migration. And so we're not only using this at Hubbard Brook to track their departure timing, but there's this entire array of automated telemetry towers that are set up by people that had the same goals as us to track migratory birds and bats as they're migrating down to their wintering grounds and also back up during the spring. This is called the MODIS network. And you can see all of these little yellow dots here are actually radio towers. So this gives us a really great opportunity to not only understand when they leave and when they're potentially arriving in the Caribbean, but also getting information like the timing of migration, how long it takes them, their migration rate, and so forth. So this is a really cool system to use for this. So where does Jamaica come in? So since I'm going to be looking at their entire full annual cycle for this project, I'm really interested in understanding a lot more about, so after the bird is done migrating during the fall, how does the timing of arrival onto the breeding grounds influence the quality of habitat that that bird occupies? And if birds that were influenced by certain climate change events, say they were delayed in breeding during the breeding season, how this may go on to influence the timing of arrival to Jamaica and quality of habitat and subsequent departure timing. And these are all concepts known as carryover effects that happen within these birds during an individual life cycle, where one event may happen that may kind of get them off course in terms of the timing of these events. So how I'm going to do this in Jamaica is that I'll be attempting to do on-the-ground arrival surveys for black-throated blue warblers in an array of habitat types in Jamaica to understand how if birds are arriving and settling in certain habitat types before others. And we would think that a black-throated blue warbler would probably settle in a wet limestone forest that's a lot wetter, probably has a lot more bugs than a dry limestone and even a coffee forest. So I'll be trying to look at all of those things and see how they influence a bird's body condition and overall survival during the winter. I'll once again be tagging all the black-throated blue warblers that I'm following in these different habitat types to determine their departure timing from Jamaica back up to their breeding grounds. And overall, I'm trying to understand if there's any kind of accumulation of these carryover effects that a bird is experiencing from the breeding grounds all the way down to Jamaica and back towards the breeding grounds again. So this is the portion of my talk where you all come in. I really would love to have Jamaica set up this kind of fence of automated radio tower sites along the North Coast. And so this is just kind of, I kind of put these here randomly. And these aren't actual sites that I figured out. But I would love to hear back from all of you. I'm going to drop my email. I would love to hear if you have a property on the North Coast, or you know somebody, or you know a great property where it would be awesome to host one of these automated radio towers on the North Coast and kind of maintain those year round. I would love to hear from you. And something that we can learn from having a tower set up like this, well, we can learn a lot of stuff. So we can get at the timing of spring migration from black-throated blue warblers that we tag in Jamaica who are departing for spring migration and heading back up to the breeding grounds. We could also potentially get arrival timing for fall migrants as they land and settle in Jamaica. This type of array that spans the entire island could expand to multiple species and multiple different projects with collaborations with Birds Caribbean. And I would love to see different types of species like shorebirds or other species that are migrants in Jamaica be tagged. And we can learn so much about their migration from this type of setup. We can also get potential passing migrants from South America at Font Hill for the towers that we've had up there. We've actually gotten detections from hermit thrushes or Swainson's thrushes that were tagged in Colombia that were actually flying over, that were migrating over Jamaica. We've detected birds like that. So I could only imagine what type of species we would detect from collaborators that are tagging birds in South America. we could also get birds stopping over on the North Coast. We could really understand the timing of departure from Jamaica, not just from Font Hill itself, or other sites within Jamaica. And it's always great to be a part of a larger network of collaborators. There's people that are in contact with us from Birds Canada, obviously Birds Caribbean. Lisa's really interested in doing this. And my collaborators at the Smithsonian are always looking for people that are really, really interested in being involved in bird work. And we'd love to have you. All right, so here I was just kind of bringing up how, oops, there we go. How for the Swainson's warbler and the black-throated blue warbler, my two focal species, they're really focused on the Caribbean islands in terms of their non-breeding range. They're especially for the Swainson's warbler, there's really, it's pretty much only the Caribbean islands and the Yucatan Peninsula. And when we can compare this against other species that we study at Font Hill, in which you can see that it's not only the Caribbean for the American redstart and the ovenbird, but it's also all of Central America, a lot of South America as well. So when we're thinking, so when I'm thinking about my project and the importance of understanding how climate change might be influencing birds in Jamaica, I'm always had this on the back of my mind as well, in that if things become progressively drier and drier, Swainson's warblers really have no other option. They need to definitely adapt to the conditions that are in the Caribbean, and you can see that even the core of Swainson's warblers are in Jamaica as well. So it's really highly occupied by these birds. And also, I do want to point out too that, so these are all different birds that I've captured at Font Hill in our long-term studies nets. And I do want to point out that the work that has been done at the Smithsonian to understand long-term changes, and that has been studying American redstarts over the 30 years that they've been down there, have also been taking into account resident birds as well. So every resident bird that we capture in our long-term banding nets, we take measurements, we note if it's a male or female, we note if it's breeding, we take all of the pertinent information that we have. So we do have a lot of this information from many, many years on these resident birds that could be potentially useful in the future. Somebody could definitely look at this now. There's a lot of information that we have about Jamaica's birds as well, not just the migratory birds that we do focus on down there. So I think that is a really cool component to the work that's done at Font Hill and has been done. And I do want to point out that ended on a good note. I know I've been talking about climate change and environmental change and its negative impacts on birds and responses to that. But I do think that what I've shown is good news, and I think Swainson's warblers are actively responding to these changes, and that could be great for adaptation. And also, so something exciting that that I could tell the whole story, but I think that you guys should read this awesome article by Scott Weidensaul about the first Kirtland's warbler in Jamaica that just so happened to be next to one of my nets, and I was lucky enough to chase it in and get some great measurements. And there's a female Kirtland's warbler they were just delisted, I think, this past year, so they aren't technically endangered anymore, but they're still definitely vulnerable. So I think that this could be great news in terms of them potentially. We're starting to see more of them occupy the island. They love edge habitats, really scrubby stuff. So that's also something to keep in mind about important habitats that we need to maintain on the island for all these different types of migratory birds that use a wide array of habitats. And so there we go. Thank you. Thank you for putting up with my internet mishaps. I'm sure all of you are used to it. I'm used to it spending time in Jamaica as well. So it's like, you never know what's going to happen. And I feel like this is definitely fitting for this talk. So thank you to BirdLife Jamaica again for inviting me to do this talk. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Here's my contact information, my email, and you can even contact me through Twitter if you'd like. If you have any ideas about tower locations or you'd love to put a tower up, I would love to chat with anybody, any and all of you about being involved in that project, because that's something I'm really excited about, and I think it could be really great. And I'm excited to collaborate with all of you into the future. So thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to show you what I've been up to. I would love to hear all your questions.
Thank you again, Alicia. We enjoyed your presentation, but you know, technology, it has a mind of its own, so does what it wants to do.
Yes, for sure.
We lost some of the questions from the previous chat, but what I recalled was Wendy had indicated that Seven Oaks might be a possible location for you to put a tower. So I'm going to send your contact information to Wendy so that you two can further the conversation.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think Wendy, you mentioned something for Pete's Birds Caribbean Talk. I think I remember that as well. So you've been on my mind. So yeah, I would love to chat about that.
All right, so we're now going to quickly go through the questions. Someone who's listed as iPhone, can you identify yourself? It said it might be possible for a tower at Caribou Apartments, Otrios. Kennedy and Liz has to go through a committee, etc. Can you put your name and contact information in the chat so that she can contact you? So the first question is from Damian White. He's asking, could these towers be used to track the migration of local birds within Jamaica? We also have radar towers in Jamaica. Could these tower technologies be integrated in your work since they are available island-wide?
Yeah, hey Damien, that's a great question. I think that for the first part of it, well, right now we just have 5 towers up at Font Hill, so that's really local. And then the tower array that would be on the North Coast, I'm not sure how well that specific array would pick up birds moving throughout the island, because really the detection distance is like at best 30 kilometers, and so 15 kilometers both ways. And that's like with full line of sight. So you'd really only be, with that particular array, be picking up birds that are kind of moving north-south right past it. To pick up some local movements of birds, you'd kind of want to have some towers interspersed. But I do like the idea of using all of the existing towers around the islands to potentially, you could even just use their existing mast to just put one of these radio receivers in and hook up a couple of our own antennas to those masts. And I know that a few people in the US have done that already for like the array that we have here. So that's also an option too, is just kind of hooking up our own little setup to all of these existing towers in locations that you'd be interested in looking at for birds that you have tagged.
Next one is Wendy is saying that she'd love to see some research on the importance of dry limestone forest at the Porto Bueno Mountains in St. Anne as a bird habitat.
Yeah, I do. There has been some research over there in the dry limestone. I actually think that region was, for the first study that ever looked at Swainson's warblers on the island, I think that's where they went, to the dry limestone forest over there. I believe also maybe some early American redstart work too. But I would, yeah, if there's any chunks of land that have maybe potentially, so for my Black-throated Blue project, I'm looking for areas that are like dry limestone next to like a coffee plantation where they're kind of all in the same area. So I can tag a bunch of birds in this like, what's it called? Just kind of this array of habitat that's like contiguous. So if that's something that is it exists in that area too, that would be wonderful. I would be really interested in doing that. But yeah, I think that's actually interesting you brought that up. I do think it's one of the first Swainson spots, so that's kind of interesting. I'm assuming it's because you saw a lot of birds there, I hope.
Next question is from Margaret Gibson. She's asking, what are the dimensions of the tower?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the tower components really consist of just a mast that's about 30 to 40 feet high. And so that's just a really skinny mast. You can even put the antennas on an existing structure, but you usually just really need to have a mast, and then the antennas are probably, so for the tower setup, you'd probably want, I would say, 3 of the antennas, and those are really, you know, maybe 5 feet long at the most. I'm sorry, I'm not converting to meters, but so pretty small. It doesn't take up much space at all. You would just need, for the antennas, you definitely need them to be kind of over a structure, so that they have a really clear line of sight. But it's a pretty small setup.
Next question from Ricardo Miller. He's asking, can you explain exactly how the tower technology works?
Yeah. Hey, Ricardo. It's good to hear from you. So the tower technology just basically detects radio signals that are on one frequency. So the nanotags that we put out on the birds are all going at one frequency. So this is a lot different than other radio telemetry or radio transmitter technology, where usually these VHF radio transmitters that we're used to putting out on birds, each of the separate tags are all on their own frequency. So you kind of have to like scan through all these different frequencies on your receiver to pick up these different transmitters. But for these receivers in this tower setup, it's only scanning one frequency. So it makes it really streamlined. And so all the tags that you put out on birds, they're all on the exact same frequency. So all the towers are just constantly listening for the same frequency. And the way that you detect different individuals is that each tag is it's coded to a specific pulse rate, basically, where as a bird is getting near a tower, the tower indicates that, oh, this is, nanotag 305, just based on the distance of pulses that are coming from those tags. So it's this really cool technology where you can put out a lot of tags because they're all on the same frequency, and you won't flood out a certain frequency just because it's listening to the same frequency. I hope that's what you meant, Ricardo. I hope that.
The next is from Wendy again. She says that the references you made to previous research work are very interesting, and she'd love for you to share them, as we are currently fighting to save the dry forest in the Porto Bueno area. Their birds, she says, yes, she sees birds there all the time.
I will gladly do so. If you want to, you can just send me an email, and at this email that I have here, my Cornell email, and I can even send along to BirdLife Jamaica email some papers that I can come across for looking at bird research that's been done there.
Next, we have Louise offering a property in Prairie St. Anne that could accommodate a tower. She's asking how high, well, you answered that, how high are the towers, and also how long will it take for the tower to be erected?
Oh, we can do it, we can do it really quick. So it usually takes an hour to 2 hours, I would say. The thing about in Jamaica, for our towers that we have in Font Hill, we kind of, because we didn't have easily transportable materials when we constructed them, we kind of had to we had to get a welder, from White House to make the pieces for the bottom, and we kind of had to weld all these pieces together to make a mast. But hopefully, I think that there'll be opportunities for us to kind of have more streamlined materials where we can actually bring masts that we can easily erect within a half an hour and attach them to a building, or we can even have freestanding masts too. So if you have a piece of land or something that has a big open area, a big field, a pasture, oh, I'm sorry, I just got a little, do you want me to stop sharing my screen? Oh, I just got a weird notification. Can you still hear me?
I'm hearing you just fine.
Oh, okay. I got a notification that says something was happening. But yeah, if you have, so we can do it two ways. We can hook up a radio tower setup to the actual side of the building, or we can construct a freestanding one. So it all kind of depends on how your property is set up. But there's a lot of different options, and it won't take us long, I don't think, if we can get the right materials.
Next question from Damian White. Alicia, I believe I could help you in getting some locations in Trelawney, St. Anne, and St. James. So that's another offline conversation. So Damian, please share your email with Alicia via her email that's on the screen, and then you guys can take that one offline.
Awesome. Thanks, Damian. I love to hear that.
Next question from Ricardo. He says, thanks for explaining how the technology works. How does the info get relayed to the user?
That's, we could do actually a couple ways as well. So the best way to do that is to actually we can hook the receiver itself up. So the radio receiver that's taking in all the information, we can actually hook that system up to the Wi-Fi. So we can actively be downloading information as it comes in, tag detections as they come in. They can actually be uploaded to a server, and we can look at those detections even in real time. But if we don't have access to Wi-Fi at a certain site, it's not a big deal. We just have to manually download that information just onto a laptop, and then it comes in a readable CSV format. And you kind of just look for detections of your tags within that file. So it's pretty user-friendly either way, but it definitely, if we put a tower up in a really remote site with no Wi-Fi that's hard to get to or something, that's when it becomes kind of a pain to get the data. But we don't really need to get the data that frequently. We usually just get the data maybe once or twice per season, or even after the season's over. It all just kind of depends. But those are kind of the two options, the Wi-Fi option or just a manual download.
Okay, next question from Ricardo again. He says, early work on Swainson warblers by researchers such as Dr. Graves were focused on the Blue Mountains. Also, the few Swainson warblers he has seen have been in that area and neighboring mountains. Is there a component of the research to look at Swainson warblers in other areas other than Fonthill?
Not at the moment, no. So not at the moment. I think there's the Swainson's warbler research is going to continue at Fonthill still, but there isn't anyone looking at Swainson's occupancy or anything throughout the island. But I would love that to happen, because even if you look at the eBird detections and everything for Swainson's warblers, it's pretty sparse. And you'd know better than me where Swainson's warblers probably occupy the island, but I would imagine that they're more widespread than even eBird is indicating. And I know that's just based on access. Like, obviously you can't access all of the forest. It's just pretty much off roads and stuff, and certain trails that you take for birding. But I would love to get a better idea of where Swainson's warblers are truly occupying their space over the island. So I'd be willing to talk about that if that's something you're interested in, Ricardo, and I'm looking at.
Next question is from Louise. How long will the towers be up for?
That's also a good question. I guess as long as we want, as long as they're working properly and they're doing what we need them to do, which is detecting migratory birds, or even local movements of resident birds, depending on if we add more towers to that array. Yeah, so I guess this is kind of, I see it as a continuation of a project that would happen kind of every single year. So this would be something that we would probably want the towers to remain up kind of all year round. I think especially since they're a little easier to get up than they are to take down. So that's also probably something else to think about when you're thinking of places that you'd like to have a tower. If it's an inconvenient spot that like looks bad next to your house and you don't want it up all the time, maybe we can figure out a better spot that's kind of not an eyesore, because it's definitely a giant tower, you know, on a structure. So yeah, I think that's the answer. We kind of just want it continually up and going kind of all the time, I think, preferably.
Ann Sutton says, I understand that hurricanes damage a lot of towers in Bahamas. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so towers that can be taken down would be good.
Yeah, that's a great point, Anne. And that is definitely something that we could think about. I think that, so Bryant Dossman, who's also on this call, is kind of the tower guru. So he's the one that built and put up all the towers that we have in Font Hill. So we could potentially put our minds together and think about some easier ways that are to put up a tower that's not so potentially clunky or hard and heavy to take down. That would definitely be more hurricane proof. One thing that I think could work is that, it says our meeting will end in 10 minutes. I don't know if I'm the only one getting this notification. So we have 10 minutes. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, so something else that we could do is just kind of, so you basically want the tower to be as high as possible. So during hurricane season, we could also just kind of lower the mast kind of halfway down, so that it's not as easily blown over. And I know that the towers in the Bahamas, I think most of them are not connected to a structure. So if we have towers that are actually securely connected to an existing structure, I think those would stand up better too. So that's a great thing to think about as well. But I think we could potentially come up with an easy way to get around that.
All right, we're going to try to take the last two very quickly. Damien is asking, could you tell me what is the power source for the towers, and also how you account for theft?
Yes, theft. That's a great reason why I'm asking you all to help me with that too, because I'm sure you'd have a better, you're thinking about that as well. And that's something that, because we're not going to be there all the time, we definitely want you all to help us find kind of safe, secure, trustworthy properties to put all this equipment on, because you're right, it is very expensive. So I don't know. I think that the best way is just to have really secure properties. I don't know how feasible it is, though. We can talk about that more, Damien, because I would love to hear your thoughts on that. As far as the power source, we can also do that two ways. We can have a solar panel powering the towers. And that's pretty easy. All you need is a solar panel that connects to a charge controller, and that just pretty much runs a marine battery, pretty consistently in Jamaica, since it's so sunny there. So that's something that you wouldn't really need to worry about power outages and stuff like that with a solar panel that's just connected to a marine battery, and it runs pretty consistently, and it has its own charge control. So you wouldn't need to worry about, getting too much energy or something like that. So that's a great option. You can also just connect it to a power source. Like, you just plug it in. You can just plug it into the wall. Just a typical outlet. So that's another way that you can do it. But that way is a little trickier, especially in areas that have a lot of power outages, because you can kind of get these brownouts that leave your receiver in this like really weird, you know, just kind of zone that's it's functioning, but it's not picking up data, which is almost worst case scenario. But there's probably ways around that. So if you're hooking it up into a wall, you probably want it to be in a place that is checked on somewhat frequently, especially after power outages, I think.
This is the last one. We have about 3 minutes. Anne Sutton is saying Brandon, herself and Brandon, they searched for them using playback in the mangroves of the Portland Bay, but they didn't find any Swainson warblers.
In the mangroves?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably, so I think that it all depends on the conditions, really. It's, if the mangrove forest that is at Font Hill is a black mangrove forest, so there's really not a lot of red mangrove, so it's not, the water there isn't too deep, and it's really flat and contiguous. So, you know, if it's kind of a mangrove forest that has a lot of red mangrove, they're not going to really go in there because it's mostly flooded, I think. So I don't know. I really think it all depends on if it's dry or wet. And it really depends on the type of forest and if there's access to leaf litter and these different types of mangroves, I think. And also, who knows? I also know that Swainson's warblers have their home ranges can be up to 30 hectares. So 1 minute, you know, and there could have been a Swainson's warbler at that area. And then who knows, 2 minutes later when you were there, it could have been on the other side of its 30 hectare home range. So yeah, who knows with those birds.
All right, so on that note, we'd like to say a very, very, very big thank you to Alicia for sharing her upcoming work. We really appreciate it. It was a very informative presentation. I'm sure we have lots more questions. Persons who have questions can either email them to birdlifejamaica@gmail.com and we'll get the answers from Alicia and share them with everyone. Or you can email her directly at the email address that's on the screen. Thanks again, Alicia, and hopefully conditions will change in the next couple of months and we can see you back here in Jamaica in maybe the first quarter, so we can come and see your work in the field. Just reminding everyone that our next webinar will be on January the 14th. It's a Thursday at 7 p.m. as well. So you can save the date in your calendars just now. So once again, happy International Animal Rights Day, happy International Human Rights Day, and good evening.